Hi, and welcome to the third week of our series called Headlines. In this series, we have just been following the big headlines of 2020. This has been a year to remember. I mean, when we look at our history books in the future, 2020 is going to be a bookmark year. So much has happened within the last few months, and we just came to July. So much has happened in 2020. So the goal is just to get a biblical perspective and understanding to all the headlines that we have been seeing. And this third week is going to be a big one. We're going to be talking about politics. And I know politics is a hot button issue, and I know everyone watching has their own view of politics, and they're probably different than my view, and everyone else watching has different views of their politics, and I know it's huge. And this is also an election year for our president. So politics is going to be on the forefront for the rest of this year. What I want to talk about is how our politics and faith interact, how politics and faith cross over, and what does that look like? Just giving a biblical understanding, a biblical lens, and how we can look at politics. So what we're going to do is, if you have a Bible, jump to Matthew chapter 22, and we're going to be reading verses 15 through 22. So Matthew chapter 22, verses 15 through 22. Then the Pharisees went out and laid plans to trap him, which is Jesus, and his words. They sent their disciples to him, along with the Herodians. "Teacher," they said, "we know that you are a man of integrity, and that you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are. Tell us then, what is your opinion? Is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not?" But Jesus, knowing their evil intent, said, "You hypocrites, why are you trying to trap me? Show me the coin used for paying the tax." They brought him a denarius. And he asked them, "Whose image is this, and whose inscription?" "Caesar," they replied. Then he said to him, "So give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." When they heard this, they were amazed, and they left him and went away. So we're going to use this story as a framework to understanding our faith in politics, because this right here is a politically charged moment that Jesus is facing. This is a politically charged moment. So my first point that I want to make is that when it comes to politics, God doesn't take sides, he takes over. So what we have right here, we have the Herodians, which really are Roman officials. They're the Romans. So let's just say they're the Romans. And then we have the Pharisees, right? We have the Pharisees, which are the Jewish religious leaders. So both of them, they really don't mix. And they're trying to trap Jesus. So they don't work together. But in this issue, they're working together, but for different reasons, different purposes. So they're seeking that if Jesus would have said, with the taxes, if Jesus had said, pay Rome taxes. So say he sided with the Romans, right? And he said, you need to pay Rome taxes. The Jews would have just flipped out and say, oh, Jesus is just a Roman pawn. That Jesus is just here to get all of us to obey and submit to Rome. Because they didn't like Rome. Rome was a conquering power. So they said, oh, Jesus is just a pawn of Rome. He's just getting us to follow them. So he would have lost the Jews. But then if he went to the Jewish side, and he said, you don't need to pay taxes to Rome, the Roman officials, the Herodians, would have jumped all over him and said, look at, he's leading a rebellion against Rome, right? They said, look, he's telling the Jews not to pay taxes to Caesar. And this would have got Jesus killed if he had joined the Jewish side that's saying you don't need to pay the imperial tax. So what Jesus does, this is just incredible. Jesus doesn't take sides, he takes over. He says, you hypocrites, right? It's just amazing. Jesus, he's not afraid to offend. He just jumps in and says, you hypocrites. And he says, you give to Caesar's what is Caesar's, and you give to God what is God's. So Jesus doesn't even take a side, right? He jumps right in the middle and fulfills both sides to the fullest. You see, this is what's troubling many times in this nation when it comes to Christianity. And I'm going to be very honest. It makes me very upset to see Christianity paired and partnered with a political party. Christianity does not belong to any political party. I'll say it again. Christianity and the faith of following Jesus does not follow a particular political party. It is not aligned with either one. Any political party you can come up with, Christianity is not partnered with them. Jesus did not come in to play in our political games. Jesus came to take over. God doesn't take sides, he takes over. And that's the groundwork, that's the foundation when it comes to our political views and how we see politics, that our faith, when it comes to following Jesus, he doesn't take sides, he takes over. That is important to know. And so what that leads to is my third point. God's kingdom is a political movement. God's kingdom is a political movement. So listen, this is what Jesus is saying. Our highest and greatest allegiance is to Jesus, while also following and obeying and seeking the good for our country. All right? So I'll say that again. Our highest and greatest allegiance is to Jesus, while also following and obeying and seeking the good for our country. You know, a good example of this is Daniel. So you heard of Daniel in the lion's den, right? Or Daniel in the burning furnace. So Daniel actually, especially Daniel in the lion's den and Daniel in the furnace, he worked for the Babylonian government, right? And the Babylonian government is full of idols and idol worship, but he worked for the Babylonian government, right? And he was helping the Babylonians and to grow and to flourish as he was there. He was in exile, but he lived in Babylon. So he was trying to help Babylon grow and flourish. But at the same time, when it came to his faith, when they said, you have to worship this idol, he's like, I'm not doing it. I'll go right into the den, the lion's den, right? And his fellow Jews were confronted with the issue as well. When it came to worshiping, they were like, hey, I'll take the furnace. I'll take the furnace, right? So their highest allegiance was to God, but they also followed and obeyed the rules of the land unless it conflicted with their highest allegiance. They said, I'll take the furnace. Or Daniel's like, I'll take the lion's den, but I am not worshiping your gods. And this is an example that Jesus is saying. He's saying, look, you give to Caesar's what is Caesar's. Whatever the tax is, you pay your taxes. That's Caesar's. That's his inscription. But who is God's? You are God's. You see, God created you. God made you for himself. We were made and created for God. So Jesus says, you give to God what is God's. What does that mean? You give to God who you are. You give to God yourself. That's important. Give your money and whatever the inscriptions of the government who ask for these taxes, you obey. But you give to God what is God's. And that is yourself. That is you. You belong to God. So, God's kingdom is a political movement. Our highest and greatest allegiance is to Jesus while also following and obeying and seeking the good of our country. And also to say, God is not the God of one particular nation. God is the God of all nations. All right? So God is not the God of one particular nation. He's the God of all nations. It's important to know as well. And the last point I want to make is that it's about worshiping God, not policy. Worshiping God and not policy. So Jesus considers our worship of him and our relationship and connection to him is what dictates our lives. It dictates our lives. Not over any policy that may pass through Washington or pass through state governments or whatever. What primarily dictates our lives is our worship and connection to Jesus, our relationship to Jesus dictates our lives over any policy. So we don't worship the policies of the day, we worship our God. And why this is important, because look, and Jesus speaks of this when it comes to the heart. Look, there's no law against lust. There's no law against greed. There's no law against selfishness, right? You can be selfish as you want. You can be lustful. You can be greedy. And you don't see people getting pulled over, people getting in trouble because they're lustful or greedy. Now, granted, you allow those things to go too far, you might get in trouble, right? But no one's being called out for their lustfulness or greediness or being too selfish. But when it comes to our worship of God and when it comes to the law of Christ in our hearts, that is an issue. Jesus says we need to deal with the lust in your heart. We need to deal with the greed in your heart. We need to deal with the selfishness in your heart. That is important to Jesus. That's what it means worshiping God. Allowing the law of God to lay claim on our lives, and we follow him. Because there's policies and laws that don't care anything about God. And matter of fact, will contradict God and his word. So then we're confronted with the issue with our politics. Do we follow the politics of the day, or do we follow and worship God and his eternal word? You know, we will be confronted with that in our lives. Do we follow the policies, or do we follow and worship God? You know? So it's important that the worshiping of God, the connection with Jesus, takes importance and dominance over policy. At the same time, as I said earlier, we follow and obey the laws. We're good citizens. But our highest and greatest allegiance is with Jesus. So this is important when it comes to politics, right? God doesn't take sides. God's not for your political party. He's not for my political party. God does not align with the political party. God comes in and takes over. He takes over the political movement called the kingdom of God, and he takes over the individuals and their heart. So to worship and follow God is a political movement. It means I'm following God, I'm following Jesus with my life. Over anything that a politician says, over any policy that gets passed, I will focus and align myself with God and his word and my relationship to him. So I really pray and I hope that this video was edifying and help just give you a different perspective of how we can see politics from a biblical worldview. Thank you for watching this, and I can't wait to talk to you guys again.